The Shift podcast, perspective and our power to change, invites us to expand our lives by changing the lens we see through. Is something different calling you? Do you ever ask yourself, is this all there is? Or have you forgotten why you're even here? Trish and Diane create insightful and empowering conversations about connecting the self, soul, nature, and community. Navigating life by choice rather than circumstance is how we make the shift to expand our humanity. The shift starts now.
Everybody, to another episode of The Shift. We're so grateful that you're here with us today. I'm one of your co-hosts, Diane McClay. I'm here with my friend Trish Campbell of invibe.ca. And our guest today again is Robert T. Norton, who is one of my new favorite poets. He's an author of several books, and he hopefully will be a regular contributor to The Shift. As always, when we start The Shift, we just want to take a moment to remember the creators who came before us, the people who were stewards of the land. And then from my part of the world, it is the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs, the Umatilla, the Yakima Nation, the Grand Ronde Nation tribes, the Nez Perce, and the Wanapum. So we feel like it's really important that we can't go forward in life until we remember where we've been and who has been there to set the scene before us. We are all creators, we are all poets, we all receive divine intervention from the muses and from nature, and we wouldn't have that if we didn't have the inspiration and the caretaking of the individuals, both named and unnamed, prior to our arrival and settlement of this area. Trish, do you want to acknowledge the folks in your area?
Thank you, Diane. Thank you for so beautifully articulating how we feel about this. And yes, I will name the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Ojibwe Chippewa. This is also the lands on which Rob settles because we're in the same area. We're both in Mississauga, Ontario. So thank you. We honor you. As you said, we're all poets. We're all creators. And thank you, Rob, for being here. I want to just go right in because I'm inspired by that. We're all poets and we're all creators and we're all creatives. And that is, one of your works is poetry. And one of the things what we're talking about here today is connecting creativity with higher consciousness and the fact that we're all poets. And I don't think a lot of people realize that we all have this gift, and poetry is so unique, and that's why it's so beautiful, is because it's an expression from our soul. And so, that's where we're taking this conversation, is to connect deeper with ourselves and to be more present and intentional. And so, Rob, maybe you can share some of your experience again, tie in that. I know you talked a little bit about your poetry, but how that has helped you connect deeper and be more present and have that balance like we talked about in our last show.
Yeah, great. First off, I just want to thank you and Diane for inviting me back to The Shift. And of course, thanks again to your awesome production staff. And just a couple of quick notes before I jump into it. I want to give a thanks to my dear friend Saif, who watched the first podcast, and he gifted me with this nifty little light wand gadget. So you guys are going to be able to see me better. That's thanks to Saif.
And we can read your cool t-shirts.
Yeah. Last but not least, I got one of my favorites on today. Boardman Gets Paid.
Nice.
That's Kawhi Leonard, but that's for another podcast. And then last but not least, I wanted to thank my dear friend and colleague, Stacy, for her support and for the wonderful anecdote she shared with me, which I'm going to share with you a little bit later on in the show. So back to the poetry. Hard to answer that question in a sense, Trish, because that was just something that happened. It almost arrived like a thunderstorm out of nowhere. I dabbled with that a little bit, but certainly the ways I was choosing to express my creativity recently were through photography and also through writing short fiction, as well as course design in a technical matter. So that poetry kind of caught me by surprise. I think the important lesson there was to just accept it and acknowledge it and let it flow out. There was no, and again, as I said, I think the last time, I can't remember, it was in the briefing notes or the post-show notes that we talked about. But in a sense, years ago, I would have, because I was focused on doing, I would have said, oh, I'm writing poems, so I'm going to sit here for 6 hours and I'm going to crank out all these poems. And instead, this experience was very unique and very light because I ping ponged back and forth from doing household chores and cooking and whatnot, back and forth to the poetry, and it transpired over basically a weekend starting Friday night. So very unique experience for me. I haven't been called back to that yet. I'm hopeful one day that might happen, but for now, there's plenty of other things to keep me occupied.
I want to chime in a little bit because I've got some beautiful words up on my screen here from the back of your book, Full Moon Poems Whispered by a Muse by you. And the very first sentence grabbed me, and it literally made suck my breath in. My heart started palpitating in a really excited way. And it's this: the muse always shows up unannounced.
Mm-hmm.
I leave the door open so that she can simply walk in as she pleases without knocking. Like I get like there's chills running up and down my arm when I hear that. And the takeaway for me, Robert, is anybody who doesn't think they're a poet or doesn't think they have access to creativity, this is the message for them. The muses will always show up unannounced. You know, I find when I write, if I'm trying to force something for an email or a letter, it's hard. But when I'm out in nature or when I experience something, we had snow for the first time the other day, and the words that got whispered in my ear were just the quietness of the snowflakes drift down around me, right? That's a muse. That's the door being open for me to connect with something that's inside my soul. And it's, you know, some of us have the language immediately and some of us don't, but the invitation is, if there's a little subtle knock on the door, don't assume that it's not for you. Don't assume that that's not opportunity coming your way. Let her in, give her a cup of coffee.
And you know, that to build on that, leave a little space for that and leave the door unlocked. Okay, leave the door unlocked.
Yeah, and don't shut the door when you hear those reels going on, like what's this about, or I don't have time for this, or all the judgments that come in for this, like what you did. Where I was kind of like leading this to is like what you did, Rob, was like you let that happen and you didn't shut it down, because I think a lot of people are just have these thoughts that come in and they don't recognize that. So first you had the awareness, and then you made the choice, there we go, to write it down. And what is so powerful about this, and tying it back to that, we all are poets, we all have this tool for us to use. Like I used to like to write when I was younger, and then kind of put that on the back burner, just like you, and then found it when I needed healing, and I was in deep grief, and I realized this was a way that allowed me to express the emotions I was feeling at the time. So I look at it as it's a vehicle for expressing our emotions, where we tend to suppress our emotions through society, through going back to the doing, getting things done, and I have to just keep going, I have to survive, I have to keep moving forward, and just taking that moment to allow that to happen, leave the door open, and see what happens. And there's no judgment there. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the gifts that we've been given during the pandemic. We've had a chance to press pause, depending on where you live, of course, but I mean, we've gone through quite a number of lengthy lockdowns. So this book came about last February, and I can't help but reflect and think, well, if we hadn't have been in a lockdown at that time, I could have been anywhere on a Friday night, out with friends, out at a basketball game. That busy life, those distractions, those things that are calling you outside of your house. So now, in the midst of the lockdown, this opportunity or gift presented itself. Mm-hmm. Maybe that wouldn't have happened in normal times.
Well, and just tying that in, like, you're not the only person that found creativity during the lockdown. I mean, a lot of people got creative with how to entertain their kids or entertain themselves or how to pass time. I mean, you spend 30 seconds and look for a, lockdown video on TikTok or YouTube or something. And there are some ridiculously creative people, because in some places of the world, they weren't even allowed to go outside of their apartment until they had certain time, really to try to mitigate the interaction of people, which on one hand is an interesting concept from a societal place, right? like we're all willing to just accept these rules of confinement for the greater good, or most people are. And then at the same time, like, why does it take a forced restriction to invite the creative to come out? And
Yeah.
one of the things Trish and you talked about before was the concept of being versus doing. The lockdown encouraged a lot of us to be more instead of do more. But I think the challenge for our listeners as we go into 2022 is we need to sustain the being, not function as if it's a government lockdown, but now we get to say what's around me that can inspire me, can motivate me, that I have thoughts and feelings on. Thoughts on that?
I completely agree with that. I feel like that time has, yeah, like you said, forced everyone to stop and, you know, become creative with how they're spending their time. And going back to the poetry thing, maybe your poetry is inventing a game with your kids, or maybe poetry is pottery or gardening. Like, that is poetic as well. Like, it's not just handwriting out poetry, but it's any way you express yourself. And so I agree with that reflection on, as we move into 2022, to maybe take this time to be creative with that energy, and be intentional with that energy, and sink into the being, rather than, you know, right out the gates, this is what I'm doing, because we've been through so much these last couple years. So yes, we've been pausing, but we've also been through a lot. So for myself personally, I'm looking at that time to still come in and allow that space, like we talked about before on one of our shows, that white space for the being, to not always have to produce, but to also allow the time to receive as well. Receive that inspiration, the intuition, the healing, the integration of the healing. That's what I wanted to say about that. I don't know about you, Rob, how you're feeling about.
Well, you both teed this up fantastically, unscripted and with no rehearsal, but I'm going to share my friend Stacy's story now. I'd recently given a PowerPoint on photography and meditation and the Taoist principle of Wu Wei. So in an email to me after, she was thanking me for the presentation and just speaking about some things that resonated with her. And she shared with me a really great little story that I'll share with you now. So her husband was asking her if she had any intentions or directions she wanted to move in 2022. And so she replied to him, I want to become more of a human being. So this was confusing to him. And he said, well, what are you now? And without batting an eye, and you got to know my friend Stacy, so without batting an eye or missing a beat, she said, I'm a human doing.
Yeah.
So that's her intent for 2022. And I'm sure we'll have some deeper conversations on it. But one of the things that interests me, and I'll share with you part of that presentation, but basically the Tao philosophy is the way of nature. And the way to be in accord with that is through Wu Wei. And that is basically, it boils down to non-doing. So according to the famed philosopher Alan Watts, it's non-action, effortless effort, actionless action that goes past Western societies that are predicated on a doing mentality rather than a being one. So I thought about that, and again, wrapping it in the creative process of photography. I agree in principle with Watts, but I thought I had to add my 2 cents in. Doing and being should not be mutually exclusive, but rather they should be complementary. Doing the work to understand creativity, let's say, will make being creative easier to access and explore. So in my mind, what I'm thinking is I cannot be necessarily until I do.
That's interesting. First of all, I love Alan Watts. I love him. I could listen to him for hours. So very well, one of my inspirations. I even quote him in my book. But I don't know if I agree with that, because that, for me, and that goes back to my my path that I've been on, and this not living to other, deciding, making the decision and the choice not to live to others' expectations. So the doing first to allow the being has that energy of having to earn the being, and I'm not in that space of having to earn anything, because that is our divine right as we come in with. that it's the conditioning that I've been breaking down and that we all have been socialized with, to have to prove our value in society by doing and producing. And okay, what do you got for me next? Like, I know being in the sales industry, I can see Rob's getting ready to answer this, but
Trying to chime in too.
I've like had some major accomplishments in the sales corporate world, and then you're only as, the next day, what are you going to do for me now? So it's always constantly have to prove yourself. So I have shifted away from that way of being, that way of human being, into the real state of human being, which is to have that more balance of the masculine and feminine energies, the masculine being the doing and the receiving being the being, and being okay with that. And sometimes it's a practice because the conditioning is so deep. But I'll let you have your word now.
Well, what I would say to that, I mean, I agree, but then also you think about it, you made a conscious decision to stop doing something. You did something to become, right? So I think that they're all balled up, and we have to be careful when we start talking in terms of absolutes. I think the two go together. Like scotch and a good cigar.
Okay.
I knew you were going to go there.
There you go.
I knew you were going to go there, right? I mean, you can have a good scotch and you can have a good cigar, and each are independently beautiful in and of themselves, especially if you have that experience with a friend or in community or in nature or with your muses, right? But, let's bring it down. If people don't drink scotch, they don't know a good cigar, and then chocolate chip cookies and milk, right? Or bread and butter.
Or PB&J.
Right. The thing where I was going to say is, I think that Western society really tries to, we're still doing it. We're trying to say it's this or that, right? And now that we could actually probably have a 5-hour debate on the merits of doing versus being, and we don't have that much time. But I think that one of the things that muses and poetry and self-reflection and stepping inward to ourselves does is, the first question we have is this right for me? Right? And is it right for me now? Because Trish, who you are today and the things you believe in and how you're practicing your life today, they weren't there for you 10 years ago or 20 years ago or when you were 7. You built those and developed a relationship with those things that allow you to have self-love and allow you to have self-confidence and allow you to express your words. But I think that there's more of an Eastern philosophy of everything is in flow and everything is interconnected. Our Western society wants us to say it's either this or that. You can have this, but not that. You have to give this thing up in order to get that. And I think part of the poetry is learning how to be in flow with whatever shows up in front of you at the moment and make it work for you in your value system in a way that leads your life forward.
Yeah.
Right?
I agree. Yeah, you're right. Thanks for calling me out.
No, you're not wrong.
Being stuck in the duality and the binary conditioning, because that's, the either or.
One of the things I'm trying to help people learn about choice is that we have been taught that you can make a right choice or a wrong choice, a bad choice or a good choice.
You're right.
What if we just agree as humans, we're going to make a choice?
You're right.
If you just make a choice to do one thing, as soon as you do that one thing, whether it's being or doing, writing or not writing, whatever, as soon as you make a choice, you have awareness, as soon as you make the choice and step into it, you get information. And that information is either going to fuel you in one direction or not, right? And you can say, I like this information I'm getting, I want to keep going, or I don't like this information and I'm going to go in a different direction. But I think that we really, creatives, where would we be if we locked ourselves into that one box of, I have to get 50 words on a page today, right?
Yeah, we wouldn't be where we're at. That's
right.
I know I wouldn't. It's
Rob, we could debate this a lot, but I'm super tempted. Did you bring anything that you could share with us? I'd love to hear your voice read a piece of your poetry to us. Do you have something that's short that you'd be willing to share?
Who, for me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that we could, because I want to talk a little bit about the full moon's poems.
You guys should have set me up for this, but I've got a copy right here. Let's see, I had a couple. Well, here's one that's pretty apropos for the holiday season.
Perfect.
for our audience. So this is my gift to you. This poem is called Gifts. Giving myself the gift of today. What more could I need? What more could I want? It has been so long since that last time. A liberation day, free from manufactured obligations. Today, there will be no shoulds, musts, or need tos. Today, there will only be the soft whispers of a muse as she leads me into my expansion.
That's beautiful.
Thanks.
I think that's great. And I think that ties that last conversation together nicely, is that we are going into the holiday season. We are, a lot of us are going to spend time with family. We're going to spend time with people that we feel obligated to, work people, family people, friend people. And the nugget for me in that is that the gift that you give to yourself is the liberation from that. Like, just say it's okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's like, families are complicated, right? But when was the last time any of our listeners have actually stopped and said, hey, wait a minute, before we commit fully to all these plans of all these things that drive us crazy, did we stop and articulate what's important to us before we go do these things? And how do we incorporate those things that are important to us while we do those crazy obligatory things?
Right. And I mean, tying this into being in that space of being present, and where the state that we're at when we're in that higher consciousness through our creativity, like practice allowing ourselves to have that time, taking it back to the creativity and the practice of being present and the watching place and all of that. Like, we're in that place when we're in our creativity, I think. I mean, I know I'm there a lot, and the more we're there, the more we're able to express what's inside of us, and then expressing that kind of brings us into that liberation. But it also gives us the power back to know what is important to us, and to also understand what's important, and have those boundaries, but then also be present for not having any expectations in those places. And for myself personally, it's like going through those processes alone, and then having those moments where we're with our families and engaging is a way to apply what we're learning, those wisdoms that we're getting through our creativity, through those moments of being present with ourselves, nurturing that connection with ourselves. We have those moments to then be more present with the people that we're in relationship with, in the same space with, in the dynamic with at that time, and to better engage, to come from a place of compassion, and having developed that first within ourselves. I mean, that's one of the most important things I've learned through my own creative healing process that was channeled through my creativity. And I think that is something that it's like perfect timing to practice that, being present, being intentional, be in that watching place in those moments. Like, not in a place of being triggered, for example, but be in a place of receiving. We don't have to immediately respond to something, how those dynamics are, and then it escalates. So I don't know if you have any thoughts around that, but I mean, that's just what I envision when people are getting together, because there's all these expectations based on our past connection, and we can show up differently, and we can to hold that space for others too as well.
I'll let Rob jump in on that, but I want to say something real quick. Sometimes, have you ever been invited to someone else's family for a birthday party or a celebration or something, and you really don't know all the stories and the dynamics, but you're kind of just sitting there eating cake or having a drink, and it's kind of just like, this is interesting. That's interesting. So a trick I would tell our listeners when they go home with their family, pretend it's somebody else's family. Like, remove the personal connection and just go in as if you're like going to a show. Like, I got a bag of popcorn and I'm just going to watch. I mean, that's what we mean by the watching place, is when you become observant of what's inside yourself, or you're observant about what's around you, then it also gives fodder to the muses. But if you just say, I'm going to be the observer, I would challenge you that you're going to see a lot that you haven't seen before, and you might even be entertained by it.
I
Yeah,
think
so
so.
to build on that, one of the ways to make that happen is to speak a little less and to listen a little more, and with compassion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a last story I'd like to share. I got a text earlier this afternoon from a good friend of mine, and he's got quite a sense of humor. So he texted me out this long story. He was at a grocery store picking up a panettone, which is an Italian holiday cake. And as he walked to the checkout line with one item, the express line was about 20 people deep. So he did what I would do. He scanned the store and he saw the two cashiers were there at the regular lines with no lineups. So he walked over. And he said, as he walked over, I guess he could feel the whole line of 20 people looking at him. And all of a sudden, this mad scurry of footsteps followed him to these two other cashiers. So the way he concluded the story was, he says, I must say, I'm worried about society's future.
Yeah.
I thought it was hysterical. And again, it speaks to what we're talking about being and doing and sleepwalking and being on autopilot and just, oh, I got one item, I'm going to the express line.
Yeah.
I'm not going to look for a creative solution to this.
Well, if anybody wants a jumpstart out of sleepwalking and into feeling inspired, I would encourage them to go to Amazon.com and get your book. Where else can they reach you or connect with you if they want to learn about the things that you do, photography, the Zen, the Wu Wei? I'm curious about that. How can people get a hold of you, Rob? And how can they get a hold of your books?
The books are on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and right now I'm not taking any consultations per se. The website's not up, but that'll be happening in 2022 at some point, with the assistance and encouragement and support of my good friend Trish, who's putting the bug in my ear and telling me to make that happen. So it's on the list for 2022, definitely. But for now, just the books. And of course, your audience is always welcome to connect with us on The Shift.
Awesome. Thank you. Robert T. Norton, his books, they are on Amazon.com, and I've got it on my Christmas list. Trish, you want to close us out? We got to head off to the next show here.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. This conversation can go into many more episodes. So thank you for joining us here. We are on the Cornelia Stephanie Media Group, Transformation Talk Radio Network, and you can find Diane and I on the KS Media Group app. Go download it in your app store. And just remember that it all begins and ends with us. The shift starts now.
Yes, it does. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Shift podcast, where perspective and our power to change intersect. Slowing down to look at things from a different angle is necessary to effect positive change. You hold the power to transform yourself and your life. It is already inside you and it's within reach. Clarity comes from awareness. Momentum comes from choice. Healing, growth, and transformation happen on the Shift podcast, the first and third Fridays at 12:30 p.m. Pacific. For more information, go to invibe.ca or dianemcclay.com.